Thank you so much for the introduction, Kunatnisha. Thank you to all the presenters for those very insightful and candid presentations. And let's just dive straight into this discussion section. So thanks to the audience, we have selected 3 questions. The first one is to do with scope 3. So I will direct this to Brad first, and then I will ask the rest of the panelists as well. What are the most common approaches taken by companies that commit to scope 3, so indirect emissions reductions? Can this be achieved solely by companies, or must they collaborate with peers, competitors, industry groups, or government bodies to achieve this? Brad?
Thank you, Shruti. Yeah, so I would say, kind of as was highlighted in all of the presentations, first is identifying your hotspot of where your emissions are. Then clearly in terms of market orientation, where are the opportunities? But I would say as well, and this was quite clear in all presentations, and perhaps especially in the last one from Kumpum, reforestation will have to make up a significant part of it. You'll also look for innovations within your value chain, assuming solutions like biochar may be a way to get removals that are relevant to the F&B industry. Others are more difficult. I'm quite curious to hear from Kunatukorn how they feel about the biocircular economy and bioplastics, which are not as economic today as they need to be. And so that suggests that there needs to be partnership with peers, but also government support if we really want to accelerate decarbonization. Yeah, so those would be some initial ideas, and then of course with Jeff in terms of market opportunity for Bangjak in terms of seizing the clean tech metals strategy that's been very effective in going upstream and seeing that as a traditional energy company, they might have to look into new markets that are different than the oil and gas that they had been and continue to operate within. So anyhow, those would be some of the approaches, and of course, very eager to hear from the other presenters their opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Kunpum, I would like to move straight on to you. As you did talk to some degree about scope 3, could you elaborate a little bit on partnerships, collaboration?
Right. I think the diversity of the businesses under the group, right, that is the most challenging factor. But we can focus, as Brad mentioned, the hotspots, and I mentioned the food value chain. Of course, other industries within the group also have significant scope 3, but let's focus on the farmers. And the most relevant of let me, for example, rice cultivation. So CP is also involved in rice. So we have Royal Umbrella Rice, and we have been working with academia in terms of methane management from rice paddy. So having to work and educate and experiment with farmers in the field with help from experts both in Thailand and also from other countries such as the Rice Nama program to help address methane from rice. So I think that the key is working very closely and sincerely with our partners, and actually aligning the incentive that if we ask our partner farms to do something that would cost them money and time, we need to ensure that we're recognizing their effort. Beyond rice, of course, there's the maize, corn growing. That was a big environmental issues in terms of both forest encroachment and residue burning. So in the past 5 years, we have been working with suppliers to guarantee that our corn plant people who supply corn to our feed business do not encroach on forests. And so in order to support that, we need very strong traceability system. So the structure from our end, we have to be ready in order to work with our partners. And mentioning the government sector, of course, we would welcome clear and enforceable policy from the state to help business first to get a level playing field, to make sure that the business that are trying to do the right thing gets recognized and not penalized by the market with this uneven playing field. And also again, I think the going back to the question, can we do this alone? Of course not. Maybe in very few industry that the business can influence most of the emission sources in the scope 3, perhaps. But for companies like for food company, agriculture company, and also many other within the group, I think the key is very close and very effective, very sincere collaboration with our partners in our value chain.
Thank you, Kun Poon. Thank you very much. Kun Jeff, would you like to go next?
Yes, absolutely. I echo what Kun Poon and Kun Brad said, and I'll give you an example. There is a lot of talk about battery recycling these days as one of the options to meet that incremental demand that will flood us soon. Obviously, that's not enough to meet that demand, but we as Bang Chak have been looking at setting up a battery recycling facility in Southeast Asia. And one of the challenges that you immediately rush into is, distribution. And I myself am from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, all the used batteries are collected by semi-governmental organizations. They collect all of that stuff for the recyclers. And that is a tremendous advantage that you have. And if we were to have that here in Thailand, it would be great because it would really solve that infrastructural issue. And we wouldn't need to have to search for all those used batteries. Basically, there would be an organization taking care of that, and we would only have to be concerned about recycling. So I think having a clear partnership with the government or semi-governmental organizations will help. Clear regulation helps because right now importing batteries from abroad is prohibited in Thailand. And also making it clear to foreign companies who can bring in the technology what benefits they will get if they invest in such a facility here in Thailand would be very helpful.
Thank you, Kun Jeff. Yes, I'm sure clarity would definitely make things easier. Dr. Natakon, I would like to pass the mic to you.
Okay, thank you. I think I fully agree with our speakers that for scope 3, probably we can accomplish through collaborations because it's actually the value chain emissions, right? And the really important thing is that we need alliance along the value chains. We need, for example, for GC business, right? We purchase some crude oil from internationally. And we actually expect that there could be some information and pathway from the players on how they would like to reduce the greenhouse gas along the value chain. But we found that actually transparency for this value chain is still limited. So meaning that not just only collaboration, but somehow we need some educations and also some instrument from governments, either it's going to be in terms of technology knowledge or financial, to support decarbonizations of the value chain together. And also for our customer, you can see that even though we're saying that we will develop the products that going to help them decarbonize their value chain or their production process, but somehow there's going to be some costs associated with this kind of the product as well, like Brad mentioned in terms of the bio things, right? So it's not just only the industrial that we make alliance and collaboration, but there should be some support from the governments and also standards of the industrial to support this kind of the thing as well. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Natakon. Actually, I would like to delve further into regulation since all of our panelists have spoken to some degree about government support. From government funding of clean technology to regulations allowing the purchase of renewable energy credits, what complementary regulations specifically are required locally and regionally to support companies in achieving net zero? Jeff, I'd like to start with you.
I think if I bring it back to critical minerals and electrification of transportation, I think it would help a great deal if there is clarity on the agenda that the government has here when it comes to production of EVs in Thailand. Thailand is often referred to as the Detroit of Asia, Southeast Asia. And I think that's definitely true when it comes to the production of internal combustion engine vehicles. And I believe that Thailand can play a similar role in the future by making it very clear that they want to extend that scope with EV production here in Thailand. Right now, that has not been communicated in a consistent and clear way. It could be better, I think. And you see some hesitation from major automotive OEMs, car makers, to then come in and make the investments that we need to get EVs rolling out, basically.
Thanks, Kunjev. Kunpum, would you like to add to that?
Again, emphasizing the importance of clear policy, consistent policy, and strong incentives. Also, I may be in the minority for the business community here that we need both carrots and sticks. So for companies that, do not follow the rules can be a powerful incentive. Let me use an example not totally related, but tangentially related to climate change, and that is waste management, right? Waste management right now is really weak. Sorry to speak my mind, but if we have a stronger and enforceable policy on waste management, requiring people, residential, commercial, industry, to really segregate their waste and manage the entire flow very well, unlock the potential of our circular economy system in terms of material management. Similarly, if we apply the same thinking to climate change, I think again, going back to my repeated message is clear policy, consistent, enforceable. I think that's my message.
Thank you very much, Kunpum. Dr. Natakon, what do you think about carrots and sticks that companies need to achieve net zero?
Yes, I think I do agree with Kunpum that firstly, we need clear directions on the country level, right? On what would be the direction that the government would like to drive going forward, and what would be the support that they can, provide to the industry. I think this will not just only, accelerate the interesting from industry, but also trying to, increase the availabilities of the, for example, renewable energy pools, and also trying to promote the renewable energy credit trading mechanism and momentum in Thailand. So if there should be some clear, financial instrument and some policy support, I think it will be the critical things to drive the momentum in these areas and makes the corporates and also others, international company to participate in this area in more extent.
Thank you, Dr. Natakon. Brad, I would like to now hand you the proverbial mic.
Sure. Just a couple of thoughts. In echoing what all the other speakers have mentioned, one would be, companies, global companies, right? That are looking to reduce Scope 2 emissions may have an easier time reducing their Scope 2 emissions if they have access to renewable energy credits, IRECs, etc. In Thailand, it seems a little more difficult to have a transparent and large market for acquiring those kind of certificates, ECAs. So that would be probably something to expand, as well as virtual PPAs to make those available so that companies in country could accelerate their Scope 2 emission reductions. And then the other that I'm intrigued by is biocircular economy. That seems to be getting some attention here in Thailand, the whole biocircular green initiative. But the level of detail, I would assume the other speakers could address this far more clearly as to whether or not it's clear enough, and is the roadway clear enough so that they know that how they can leverage that initiative and interest from the government. Because certainly globally, biocircular economy will be very essential to meeting both decarbonization, but also nature-focused initiatives. So it's a great initiative here in Thailand, but its clarity, at least to me, is probably not where it ought to be to truly incentivize corporate action.
Thank you, Brad. And to all panelists, I would ask, are there any particular countries that we should be using as an example who have excellent guidelines?
Yeah, I think if you look at Northwestern Europe, two examples come to mind. One is Norway and one is Germany. I think both countries have proven that, you know, once the government acts as an initiator of one piece of that supply chain, the rest of the ecosystem will follow. And, you know, just to make the link back to inviting EV companies here to produce EVs, once that happens here in Thailand, it will open up a whole ecosystem of battery and EV related business, including recycling of the batteries that come back from the EVs, but also the processing of critical minerals. And that will allow a country really to step up to the next level and create a green tech based economy. So I think Germany and Norway are two very good examples of countries that have done it in that way and have succeeded in creating their own ecosystem.
Thank you, Kunjaf. I would now like to shift the conversation slightly to offsets, which is our third question for the day. What is the role of carbon offsets, so that is to say, compensation for greenhouse gas emissions through activities such as reforestation or afforestation in a company's decarbonization plan? When should they be used, and what type of offsets are best for different companies? Dr. Natakan, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. I think in terms of offsets for GC, I think that should be our last tier to decarbonize the carbon from our emission from facilities. We're saying this because I think our intention is that for the first tier, we were trying to do our best to reduce the emission from our production's manufacturing process. And also in terms of the product offering, we were trying to fully apply the circular economy concept to help reducing not just only waste, but trying to close the loop and allows the material to be, reused as a raw material for our process as well, to help the requirement for the virgin feedstocks. And then we are fully aware that by doing this kind of the two things more effectively, there should be some emission left. And this is how important of the offsets to place in this kind of the games. And for our approach, I think we set up two approach. Actually three major approach for the offset. Firstly, I think it's not just really offset, but trying to make compensation through the technologies, for example, carbon captures. And in terms of the offset, we trying to do the natural-based solutions activities, for example, forestation, that we think that is the activity that we can do today. And also we are trying to see if we can collect carbon credit and do a kind of the carbon trading as well to help offsetting the rest of our carbon accountings. So this is the way that GC trying to manage our greenhouse gas emission through the offset.
Thank you, Dr. Natakan. Kun Poom?
I would like to actually reflect Dr. Natakan and Kun Brad's comment. I think Kun Brad's last few slides was perfect in summarizing the type of offset, right, that we should be looking at and when they are appropriate. But I think it's imperative that we must recognize that even with all the possible measures or the practical ways to reduce our own emission, there will still be some left within our own operation. So, as well as our scope 3 emissions, right? So having using offsets is a recognition of that fact, and we see it as a communication tools to net zero and offset is. And we really use offset as the last resort, as the final solution. Then it's necessary, and I think it's not totally fair to classify all users of offsets as greenwashing, because actually, from what we see currently, is companies that use offsets are actually quite active in reducing their own emissions, right? So they're both active on both fronts. And so again, offsets used to create awareness, communication tool. I think that's appropriate. And also echoing Dr. Natagon's comment about nature-based solution, reforestation, and also Kun Brad's comment about offsets coming from projects that also have co-benefits in terms of driving ESG, for example. And looking at community-based agriculture and forestry, mostly. Yeah.
Thank you. Kun Jeff, would you please add to the conversation on offsets?
I have nothing to add, really. I agree with all that has been said already.
Wonderful, thank you. And Brad?
Just to add a couple things that, offsetting can get a bit of a bad rap from some folks. And I can see why in some cases, but in many cases, I don't. Especially if it's nature-based solutions, forest carbon offsetting, genuine projects. We've attempted to do projects that would have done tremendous good. Mangrove restoration projects or conservation, that has immediate adaptation benefits beyond the carbon that really protects lives, that has value. You can't monetize that, but you can monetize carbon. So you can bring revenue into communities that desperately need it, leading with carbon. You can improve soil health, water, air quality, food security. There are so many co-benefits to a well-done nature-based solution project that the carbon offset that you get from it is one piece. But all these other pieces are extremely critical. And if you combine that with creating shared value or SDG outcomes that companies need to do, or task force on nature, based disclosures, right? That's a new program that's coming up that's going to require companies to really understand their impact and dependencies on nature. Incorporating that into your strategy around forest-based, conservation is really meaningful, and there's no reason to wait until 2040 to do that. There's a real need to do that today. So if you take that systems level view, that broad view of carbon, especially around land-based projects, I think is really valuable. If it's being done so that you don't have to change your business at all, then that's not wise, because people will see that and call it out. So those would be my comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. And on a closing note, I'd like to ask all panelists if you have any advice for companies that are just starting off on this net zero journey. Where to start? It can be very overwhelming. Perhaps starting with Kun Jeff?
Sure. I think keep it close to yourself, and it can be overwhelming. It's a lot to digest, at least from my experience. So I would say if you don't necessarily know what to do, start looking at how to make your production process more efficient, how you can start with energy savings. Small things help as well. Things like travel policy revisions, doing more by using digital tools. And then for the big stuff, you can hire AWR Lloyd to advise. Would my advice be? But yeah, that's what I would say.
A double thank you to you. Kun Poom?
Yes. So I think the very often repeated cliche of you can't manage what you can't measure. So starting with a complete understanding, a complete inventory of your greenhouse gas emissions, and understand what factor drive those emissions. And like everyone else on the panel mentioned, understanding the hotspots. What are the major emissions sources, and find solutions to prioritize by cost, by ease of implementation, etc. And just like any other management decision, right? You prioritize the cost effectiveness, the outcome, and then you implement it. But it has to be coming down from the top, right? If the top executive of the organization do not take that as a major business decision and treat it as a side project, as a quote unquote external after process CSR project, or to use the word greenwashing, etc. So it has to be coming from internal business decision that we want to really to future-proof our business, to dissociate our growth with our emission, and that would make sense in terms of your business strategy. Yes.
Thank you. I think that's excellent advice. Dr. Natakon?
Yes, I think I do agree with what Kun Pooms and also Jeff has mentioned, that I think firstly we need to understand what are the current baseline of your business and what are the hotspots. And you may also need to understand what will be the key driving force for your business to reach the net zero or develop the decarbonization rates. Either it's going to be your stakeholders, either it's going to be the regulations or any other things. For example, the change of the customers preferential, for example. And then I think currently there are some available tools that you can use. For example, there's a TCFD tools framework that you can use to evaluate what will be the business impacts based on the climate action, compare between do nothing and do the right things. And then you will have clear pictures to talk to the top management. And then the top tone is really, important for the corporate to drive the executions. And if you have already set the corporate tone to accomplish the net zero or decarbonization rate, I think there is still some standards and tools that you can still follow as well. For example, a science-based target, net zero initiative, or others that you can still use this as a framework as your initial move and decide what will be the action that you would like to take in the short terms, and also trying to study what will be the really needed for the long-term action for the corporates as well.
Thank you, Dr. Natakon. Brad, closing notes?
Yeah, just one thought would be, like, from the big picture perspective is we looked at one of those charts that show you just how deep decarbonization must be over the next 80 years. And it's a radical transformation of our economy. And for essentially for every company, decarbonization should start to enter into your sense of purpose at the company, right? So to energize the company around how do we accelerate or play a meaningful role in this deep decarbonization. I assume for all the speakers, from Jeff, Poom, and Natakorn, that look at the CVCs. I imagine 5 years ago, climate was not central to CVC discussions, maybe 6 years or so ago. I assume that's quite different today, right? The innovation, the strategy is really around decarbonization. So I think part of it is just to get energized by that big picture, that your firm has a strong role in contributing to decarbonization. And then once that energy is there, it's going to be a lot easier to have the right focus, have the right team commitment to do all the things that are necessary, the building blocks of carbon accounting, to getting teams to communicate and engage with each other on how to manage this transition.
Thank you. And a big thank you to all four of you for your really candid insights and your very practical advice. On that note, I'd like to wrap up the panel discussion and hand the floor back to Khun Matneecha.